Well, the midterm election's right around the corner, and a new Wall Street Journal report says that some incumbents are skipping debates and avoiding the media. In Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz says Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman won't debate him. And in Georgia, Herschel Walker says that Senator Raphael Warnock will not agree to a debate with him either. Some journalists say that they seem to be avoiding interviews as well. So how will all of this affect the midterm elections? We want to bring in our Sunday night panel. Tony Katz, WIBC Indianapolis radio host, and Democratic strategist Crystal Knight joining us live to answer some questions. It's great to see you both. And Tony, let's get started with you. There is a debate over debates right now. Why do you think incumbents are skipping debates, and will that strategy work?
Well, there is I guess you'd call it a philosophy, an idea that if you feel like you have it well in hand, the debate can only hurt you, so you don't need the debate. But in the case of Walker Warnock, that's very different than Oz Fetterman. Walker Warnock is I believe you have Raphael Warnock, the current senator, who doesn't want to have to explain Joe Biden and the Biden record. They can talk about, look at all the things we passed, but now you have to talk about, look at what all these things have done or not done for America. You talked big about the Inflation Reduction Act, but in the words of Joe Manchin, it doesn't take any effect or hold for 3 years. And as the economists have told us, it doesn't do anything about inflation. This was a green spending bill. In the case of Fetterman and Oz, this is about whether or not John Fetterman is healthy. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I believe that's the name of the newspaper, has asked the question, is John Fetterman, after having a stroke in May before the primary, healthy enough to debate? He won't do it. There are serious questions about his health. These are legitimate questions, and they're ones that have to be answered. His campaign has decided to go the Joe Biden, let's campaign from the basement route.
Okay. Well, Crystal, let me bring in your voice here. You know, there's always been some amount of contention between politicians and the press. Over the last few years, though, it seems to have gotten worse. And if politicians are not willing to talk about their policies to the media, how can voters know where they stand?
Well, I don't think voters will know where they stand. I think debates are healthy. Debates help voters decide ultimately which way they will cast their vote. We've seen that over and over again in a number of elections. And so I do think that it's critical that candidates get their voices out there and get on the record about policy so that it's not a mystery where they stand. And what we know already is that, you know, when candidates debate, it does tend to swing the election outcome either by a percentage point, or in some cases it can swing up to 4 or 5 percentage points. And so it is quite tricky when you see candidates saying, I don't want to debate, or I only want to agree to one debate, because likely they're not, you know, strong on particular policy points. And if they waffle, that could really mean the end of their election.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Tony, recently President Biden has been attacking President Trump and his supporters at rallies for Democrats ahead of the midterms. What impact do you think that has on voters?
I don't think it has any whatsoever. And I think the proof of this is take a look at the entire last week, where every day at the White House press briefing, you had Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, explaining the speech, explaining what Biden meant. He wasn't talking about the people. He was talking about elected officials. He sees this group as very violent. Oh, no, wait, no, he's not calling anybody a fascist. I believe the adage is, and Crystal can correct me if I'm wrong, when you're explaining, you're losing. And there's no doubt that the White House has been losing. This speech that President Biden gave at Independence Hall did not go over well. It didn't go over with the American people well. And again, Trump versus Biden is not where people are in this midterm election. That is noise for the Beltway folk. That isn't what's happening on Midwest Main Street.
I mean, Crystal, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you a chance to respond to this.
Well, I agree and disagree with something that he said. I think on one instance, when people do over-explain, that is a challenge. And what we know is that Democrats have had a tough time with messaging in general. But I do think that the president's speech in Philadelphia was good because he laid out where the Republican Party is and where the Democratic Party is. And so much of his speech talked about this election protection or the assault on American democracy as we know it, because there are still people people in this country who are election deniers. And so in that instance, it was a win. But I do agree that, the press secretary having to go back and clean up, that's not always a good look for this president. And we've seen that not only with her, but even with Jen Psaki when she was the press secretary. And so Democrats really have to hone in on our messaging, because we lose in the messaging war over and over again when we don't have a leader who speaks clear to the American public and stands on what he says.
I even saw Tony nodding a little bit at the end there. I'm so sorry we're out of time, but we appreciate the diverse perspectives that you bring. And coming to the table to have a conversation, we have to be able to have that conversation. Tony Katz, Crystal Knight, you are so appreciated. Thank you for joining us tonight.